In May 2018, the Trump administration withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal and launched what it called maximum pressure, the most comprehensive sanctions regime ever imposed on a nation outside wartime. The stated goals were clear: force Iran to negotiate a new deal, end its regional activities, stop its missile program, or face economic collapse and potential regime change. 5 years later, none of those objectives were achieved. Iran's nuclear program is more advanced than before. Its regional network is stronger, its missile arsenal has expanded, and the regime survived. But here's what most analysis misses. This wasn't simply American failure, it was Iranian strategy. Iran didn't just survive Trump's trap, it systematically turned each element of that trap into a strategic asset. The sanctions that were supposed to isolate Iran instead isolated America from its European allies. The pressure that was meant to weaken Iranian influence actually expanded it across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. The economic warfare designed to fuel domestic unrest instead gave the regime a nationalist cause and an external enemy to blame. This is the story of how a regional power with a fraction of America's military and economic strength read its opponent's strategy, identified the fatal contradictions within it, and converted maximum pressure into maximum opportunity. But to understand how Iran pulled this off, we need to understand something most analysts missed from the beginning. Trump's strategy wasn't just aggressive, it was strategically incoherent. And Iran saw that immediately. Let's start with what actually happened and why it looked at first like Iran had no way out. In May 2018, President Trump withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear deal negotiated under Obama. His administration argued the deal was too narrow. It didn't address Iran's ballistic missiles' regional activities or sunset clauses that would eventually allow unrestricted nuclear work. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo presented 12 demands. They ranged from ending uranium enrichment entirely to withdrawing all forces from Syria. The list was maximalist by design. The mechanism was economic strangulation. Reimpose all sanctions. Target Iran's oil exports. Cut off banking access. And threaten secondary sanctions on any country doing business with Tehran. The impact was immediate and severe. By 2019, Iran's oil exports had collapsed from 2.5 million barrels per day to under 200,000. The currency crashed. Inflation soared. The pressure was real. Trump's theory of victory was simple. Economic pain would either force the regime to capitulate or trigger internal collapse. Either outcome would be a win. Iran's initial response appeared defensive. It stayed in the JCPOA for over a year, hoping European allies would provide economic relief. But Europe, unwilling to defy American sanctions, offered symbolic support, but no real economic lifeline. By mid-2019, Iran began its counter-strategy. It started breaching nuclear limits incrementally. It used proxy forces to strike Saudi oil facilities and attack shipping in the Gulf. It shot down a U.S. drone worth over $100 million. Each move was calibrated to signal resolve without crossing Trump's red line of killing Americans. The question everyone asked was, how long can Iran hold out? But Iran wasn't trying to hold out. It was buying time and positioning pieces for a longer game. Iran wasn't reacting to Trump's pressure. It was implementing a playbook it had prepared years earlier. And that preparation made all the difference. To understand that playbook, we need to go back further, because Iran's strategy in 2018 was shaped by lessons learned over 4 decades of confrontation with America. Iran's modern strategic culture was forged in the 1980s during the Iran-Iraq War. Abandoned by international allies, sanctioned by both superpowers, and attacked with chemical weapons, Iran learned to operate in total isolation. That experience taught 3 lessons that shaped its response to Trump. First, never depend on the international system for survival. Second, develop asymmetric capabilities that make direct confrontation costly for stronger enemies. Third, strategic patience and resilience matter more than short-term tactical victories. After the war, Iran built what it called the resistance economy, a strategy of economic self-reliance combined with sanctions evasion networks. It developed a regional deterrence architecture through proxy forces in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Gaza. This wasn't imperial expansion, it was strategic defense in depth. By projecting influence through non-state allies, Iran created the ability to impose costs on adversaries without direct confrontation. When Bush included Iran in the axis of evil in 2002, Iran accelerated its nuclear program as an insurance policy. When Obama imposed sanctions from 2012 to 2015, Iran demonstrated it could withstand pressure while maintaining regional activities. The JCPOA was a tactical compromise, not strategic surrender. Iran traded temporary nuclear restrictions for sanctions relief, while preserving its regional network and missile program. Critically, Iran's leadership studied American strategy across multiple administrations. They observed that U.S. pressure campaigns typically followed a pattern: maximize coercion demand, total capitulation, then either launch military action or lose interest when quick results don't materialize. Iran's counter-strategy became never give the U.S. a clear victory or a clear casus belli, absorb the pressure, wait for American political cycles to shift, and exploit the spaces where U.S. commitment is shallow. When Trump withdrew from the JCPOA, Iran's leadership saw a familiar pattern, but with a crucial difference. Unlike previous presidents, Trump openly questioned the value of U.S. commitments in the Middle East. He wanted to reduce American military presence, not expand it. He criticized the Iraq War and wanted out of Syria. This created a strategic contradiction. Trump was applying maximum pressure while simultaneously signaling he didn't want maximum commitment. Iran recognized this gap immediately. This historical pattern gave Iran a crucial insight. Trump's strategy had a built-in timer, and if Iran could survive long enough, the contradictions would do the rest. So how exactly did Iran exploit those contradictions? The answer lies in a strategy most Western analysts didn't recognize until it was too late. Iran's counter-strategy rested on 4 pillars each, designed to exploit a specific vulnerability in Trump's approach. Pillar 1, strategic patience and incremental escalation. Iran understood Trump's political timeline. He needed either a new deal or regime change before the 2020 election to claim victory. Iran simply refused to provide either. Instead of collapsing or negotiating, Iran implemented what it called maximum resistance, calibrated responses that demonstrated capability without triggering full American retaliation. After the Aramco attacks cut Saudi oil production in half, Trump didn't strike Iran. After Iran shot down a U.S. Global Hawk drone worth over $100 million, Trump called off retaliatory strikes at the last minute. Iran read this correctly. Trump wanted the appearance of strength without actual war. So Iran kept escalating just enough to demonstrate that pressure wouldn't work, but not enough to force Trump's hand. Each action expanded Iran's leverage while exposing Trump's reluctance to follow through. Pillar 2, turning sanctions into alliance wedges. Trump's secondary sanctions threatened to punish European companies doing business with Iran. This created a transatlantic crisis. Europe had negotiated the JCPOA in good faith and opposed withdrawal. By maintaining JCPOA compliance for over a year, while Trump violated it, Iran positioned itself as the responsible party and America as the treaty breaker. Europe created Instex, a payment mechanism to bypass sanctions, symbolic in scale but significant in precedent. It was the first time European allies built financial infrastructure explicitly to circumvent U.S. sanctions. China and Russia expanded their Iran trade, calculating that U.S. secondary sanctions were a bigger long-term threat than Iranian nuclear development. Trump's unilateralism didn't isolate Iran, it isolated America from its own alliance system. Iran traded economic pain for geopolitical gain, weakened Western unity. Pillar 3, regional vacuum exploitation. Trump's Middle East strategy contained a fatal contradiction. He wanted to confront Iran while withdrawing from the region. He reduced forces in Syria, negotiated withdrawal from Afghanistan, and avoided direct military commitment after Iranian provocations. Iran filled every vacuum. In Iraq, after the U.S. killed Soleimani in January 2020, pro-Iranian militias pressured the Iraqi parliament to demand U.S. withdrawal. In Syria, Iran entrenched its presence while Trump pulled back. In Yemen, despite Saudi and UAE efforts, Houthi forces expanded control. In Lebanon, Hezbollah maintained dominance. The maximum pressure campaign did nothing to roll back Iranian regional influence because Trump wasn't willing to deploy the military force that rollback required. Iran understood. Economic pressure without military commitment is sound without fury. Pillar 4. Domestic legitimacy through external enemies. Economic warfare can topple regimes, but only if domestic opposition can organize and mobilize. Trump's rhetoric, particularly his travel ban on Iranian citizens and refusal to distinguish between the Iranian government and people, allowed the regime to frame sanctions as American hostility toward Iran itself, not just its government. The January 2020 assassination of Qasem Soleimani, whatever its tactical value, was a strategic gift to Tehran. Millions attended his funeral. It was the largest public gathering in Iranian history, a moment of nationalist unity the regime hadn't seen since the early revolutionary period. Domestic protests over economic conditions, which had emerged in 2017 and 2019, were subordinated to nationalist resistance against America. Trump's pressure didn't weaken regime legitimacy, it provided the external threat necessary to consolidate it. Every failed Iranian strategy needs an external enemy. Trump provided one. The strategic reversal. By 2020, the reversal was complete. Iran had more enriched uranium than before the JCPOA. Its regional position was stronger. The Western alliance was fractured. And domestically, the regime had survived without capitulating. Trump achieved tactical successes, Soleimani's death, economic damage, but strategic failure. He wanted a better deal, Iran refused. He wanted regime change, the regime consolidated. He wanted to isolate Iran, he isolated America. The trap Trump set was built on an assumption that economic pain would translate into political surrender. Iran's counter was to accept the pain, deny the surrender, and wait for the contradictions to compound. And they did. But the strategic reversal didn't end with Trump's term. The consequences of what Iran accomplished are still reshaping the Middle East today. To understand why this matters beyond U.S.-Iran relations, we need to look at what Iran's success actually changed regionally and globally. Iran's reversal of Trump's pressure campaign produced consequences far beyond bilateral relations. Regional power realignment. First, it fundamentally altered the Middle East balance of power. For decades, U.S. security guarantees underpinned the regional order. American pressure was assumed to be decisive. Iran demonstrated it wasn't not if the target refused to break and the U.S. wasn't willing to escalate to war. This changed calculations across the region. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, having pushed Trump to confront Iran, watched maximum pressure fail. By 2021, both began direct talks with Tehran seeking détente. This wasn't ideological alignment, it was hedging. If American pressure couldn't contain Iran, regional states needed their own accommodation. The Abraham Accords, normalizing Israeli Gulf relations, were partly a response to perceived Iranian strength and American unreliability. The regional message, U.S. dominance, is no longer guaranteed. The limits of economic warfare. Second, it exposed the limits of sanctions as a coercive tool against determined states. Sanctions can inflict economic damage. Iran's economy contracted significantly. But translating economic pain into political change requires either domestic collapse or leadership capitulation. Iran demonstrated that authoritarian regimes with nationalist legitimacy, diversified economies, and sanctions evasion networks can absorb punishment indefinitely. This has implications beyond Iran. It suggests that economic warfare against China, Russia, or North Korea may inflict costs but won't guarantee strategic victory. The assumption that economic interdependence gives the West automatic coercive leverage is increasingly questionable. Iran's resistance economy became a model studied from Caracas to Pyongyang. Alliance fragmentation third, it accelerated transatlantic strategic divergence. Europe's creation of Instex, though limited in practice, was symbolically profound. It represented European willingness to defy American secondary sanctions to preserve their own strategic autonomy. The Iran case became a reference point in broader debates about European sovereignty, dollar dominance, and American unilateralism. It contributed to European discussions about strategic autonomy, alternative payment systems, and reducing dependence on U.S.-dominated financial infrastructure. Trump's Iran policy didn't just fail to isolate Tehran, it raised questions about whether Washington could still command alliance unity on non-NATO issues. Nuclear proliferation, calculus fourth. It altered nuclear proliferation incentives. Iran learned that negotiated agreements with the U.S. are only as durable as the sitting president. The JCPOA, a multilateral treaty, was unilaterally abandoned despite Iranian compliance. The lesson for other states considering nuclear deals: American commitments are unreliable. This strengthens the argument within Tehran for weaponization as the only real deterrent. It also affects other potential proliferators. If diplomacy can be discarded without consequence, why negotiate? North Korea cited Iran as justification for refusing to trade away its weapons. The collapse of the JCPOA without penalty for the party that violated it undermined the entire non-proliferation bargain. Great power competition. Finally, Iran's success became a case study in asymmetric resistance against American pressure. China and Russia observed closely. The mechanisms Iran used: strategic patience, alliance, wedge exploitation, economic resilience, regional proxies, are applicable to their own competitions with Washington. Iran demonstrated that U.S. pressure campaigns can be survived reversed and turned into advantage if the target is patient, strategic, and willing to accept short-term costs for long-term position. This lesson is being applied in Ukraine, Taiwan, and the South China Sea. These consequences are still playing out. But the most important question isn't what Iran achieved, it's what happens next. So where does this leave U.S.-Iran relations, regional stability, and the nuclear question? Let's look at the scenarios. Iran's reversal of Trump's strategy creates 4 possible pathways forward, each with distinct risks and opportunities. Scenario 1, negotiated return to constraints. The Biden administration attempted to return to the JCPOA framework, but negotiations stalled. A deal remains possible if both sides accept mutual compromises. Iran rolling back enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief. The obstacle isn't technical, it's political trust. Iran questions whether any American president can guarantee long-term commitment. The U.S. questions whether Iran will use sanctions relief to expand regional activities. For this scenario to work, both sides need to accept less than maximum demands. The U.S. would need to tolerate Iran's regional presence and missile program in exchange for nuclear constraints. Iran would need to accept intrusive monitoring and enrichment limits in exchange for economic integration. The window exists but is narrowing. Iran's nuclear program advances monthly. Domestic politics in both countries favor hardliners. If a deal happens, it will look more like crisis management than strategic resolution. Probability, low to moderate, decreasing with time. Scenario 2, strategic accommodation without agreement. More likely is an informal equilibrium without a formal deal. Both sides maintain pressure, but avoid escalation to war. Iran continues nuclear advances, but stops short of weaponization. The U.S. maintains sanctions, but doesn't expand them significantly. Regional competition continues through proxies, but within manageable bounds. This is essentially the current state frozen conflict rather than resolution. It's stable in the short term, but carries long-term risks. Miscalculation, proxy escalation, or Iran deciding deterrence requires an actual weapon. This scenario benefits neither side, but may be the least bad option available. Iran maintains leverage. The U.S. avoids political costs of concessions. Regional states adapt through hedging and direct dialogue with Tehran. Probability, high. Scenario 3, escalation to crisis. A third pathway is renewed confrontation. This could be triggered by Iranian nuclear breakout, a major proxy attack, or a new U.S. administration seeking regime change. Israel remains the wild card. It has consistently stated it won't accept Iranian weaponization and may conduct military strikes regardless of U.S. preferences. An Israeli strike could trigger Iranian retaliation against U.S. forces in Iraq or the Gulf, creating escalation both sides want to avoid but can't fully control. Alternatively, domestic instability in Iran, economic protests, ethnic tensions, or succession crises could create windows where external pressure or internal opposition threatens the regime. But as Iran demonstrated under Trump, external pressure often consolidates rather than weakens authoritarian regimes. Escalation to direct U.S.-Iran war remains unlikely. Neither side wants it, but proxy conflicts, limited strikes, or cyber warfare could intensify. Probability, moderate increasing if nuclear breakout occurs. Scenario 4. Regional security architecture. The least discussed but potentially most durable outcome is a regional security framework that includes Iran. This would require acknowledging Iran as a permanent regional power, integrating it into security arrangements, and addressing mutual concerns, Gulf security nuclear limits, economic integration through multilateral mechanisms. This resembles Europe's Cold War détente or the Helsinki Accords. It's politically difficult but strategically logical. The alternative is perpetual confrontation. Neither side can win. Saudi-Iranian dialogue, China's mediation efforts, and Gulf states' recognition that American guarantees are insufficient all point toward this possibility. It won't happen quickly, but long-term trajectories may favor accommodation over confrontation. Probability, low short-term, increasing over decades. Whichever path unfolds, one thing is clear. The assumption that American pressure automatically produces compliance is over. So what's the real lesson here? It's not just about Iran or Trump, it's about power itself. We opened with a paradox. How did a regional power under maximum pressure emerge strategically stronger? The answer isn't that Iran is exceptionally powerful, it's that Trump's strategy was built on assumptions that no longer hold. The assumption that economic pain automatically translates into political surrender. The assumption that American pressure commands automatic alliance support. The assumption that weaker powers have no option but capitulation or collapse. Iran didn't defeat American power, it exposed the limits of how that power was applied. Strategic patience beat tactical pressure. Asymmetric resistance beat overwhelming force. Long-term positioning beat short-term coercion. Trump's trap failed because it was constructed on a false premise, that maximum pressure without maximum commitment could force a determined adversary to surrender. Iran called that bluff. And in doing so, it revealed something larger about the international system itself. We're transitioning from an era where U.S. dominance was assumed to one where it must be constantly reestablished through commitment, not just rhetoric. Economic interdependence, once a tool of American leverage, is becoming a weapon others can use to create alternatives. Regime resilience in authoritarian states is stronger than Cold War models predicted. And alliance unity can no longer be taken for granted when partners question the consistency of American strategy. The Iran case won't be the last time a weaker power turns a stronger opponent's strategy against it. We're already seeing echoes in how China manages U.S. pressure, how Russia absorbs sanctions, how North Korea maintains its weapons program. The lesson isn't that America is weak, it's that strength without strategy is just noise. And adversaries who understand that will keep turning traps into opportunities. The question now isn't whether Iran turned Trump's trap against him, it's whether America has learned why the trap failed in the first place. Because the next confrontation is already being prepared. And the other side is studying this playbook very carefully.